A millionaire asked her to pretend as his girlfriend, but her response left him speechless. The city sky dressed itself in deep orange, as if it were burning, while the shadows of buildings stretched across the square. The afternoon fell heavy, and the murmur of conversations mixed with the screech of streetcars and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee escaping from the doors of the small cafe on the corner. There was Emma, leaning over a table to clean a spilled sugar stain, her hands agile and her expression serene, oblivious to the tumult of suited men and hurried women crossing the square, as if the world were ending with each step. A few meters away, leaning against the railing of a luxury restaurant, stood James with his phone pressed to his ear, his brow furrowed, his impeccable grey suit wrinkled at the shoulders from the bad temper that dominated him. He wasn't shouting, he didn't need to. His silence was so fierce that whoever was on the other end of the call seemed to have shrunk to the size of an ant. "I don't care what they say," he finally said, with calculated coldness. "Tonight I close the deal. No one else will question my commitment." When he hung up, his phone screen still trembled in his fingers from the pressure with which he held it. His reflection in the window returned the face of an elegant, confident man, but there was a flash of desperation in his eyes that was hard to hide. He breathed deeply, looked around, and then he saw her. Emma. He didn't know why, among so many people, his eyes came to rest precisely on her. Perhaps because her simple dress and calm walk contrasted with the hysteria of the world he inhabited. Perhaps because at that moment, she raised her gaze and their eyes collided, as if the scene had already been written in some corner of destiny. James approached with long strides, determined, with the cruel confidence of one accustomed to buying whatever he wants. He interrupted her just as she was returning to the cafe with an empty tray. "You," he said, without introducing himself, without even blinking. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend. Now. Just 5 minutes." Emma looked at him as if he had just asked her to stop the earth with her hands. She blinked, tucked a loose strand behind her ear, and studied him calmly, like someone measuring an adversary. He raised his eyebrows, impatient. "I'll pay you well." And as if to emphasize it, he slid a folded bill onto the tray she was still holding. Then the unexpected happened. Emma didn't look down at the bill. She didn't step away either. She didn't even smile. Instead, with a firm voice and without breaking the stillness that seemed to envelop her, she responded, "My dignity has no price, but if you want my time, you'll have to pay with something more than money." James stood motionless, unable to articulate a word. The square continued its course around them, indifferent to the tension that now vibrated between them like an invisible thread. For the first time in a long time, someone had disarmed him. Emma set the tray on a nearby table, crossed her arms, and looked at him with a small defiant spark in her eyes. "So, what are you really willing to offer?" James swallowed, noticing how the situation was slipping from his hands. That woman, that simple waitress, had managed to make him, the millionaire always in command, lose control. And there at that moment, as the evening lights faded over the square, he knew that those 5 minutes would be anything but simple. If this story is already gripping you, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss what comes next. Because what Emma will ask of James will change everything he thinks he knows about love and about himself. Meanwhile, James breathed deeply, looking for a way to regain his dominance, and Emma, with an almost cruel serenity, gestured for him to speak, because from now on he would no longer be setting the price. And so, with a tacit promise in the air, the story was just beginning. James wasn't used to being questioned. Since he could remember, his word was enough to make entire boardrooms spin. His last name opened doors and closed mouths. From childhood, his father had taught him to see human relationships as simple transactions. You give something, you get something, nothing more. But there she was, that woman in a simple dress, hands still damp from the cloth she used to clean tables, denying him with disconcerting tranquility what he had always believed was his by right. He composed himself as best he could, sliding his fingers over the lapels of his jacket. "And what exactly do you want?" he finally asked, measuring each word to regain ground. Emma smiled slightly, a soft curve on her lips that wasn't quite a smile, rather a reminder that he was playing on unfamiliar territory. "I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me the truth," she responded. "Why do you need this? Why me?" For the first time in a long time, James felt the heat of shame rising up his neck. because the truth was, he had no one else to ask. His life was full of empty faces, false smiles, and commitments as fragile as glass. He had spent years building an empire that seemed invulnerable, but today, in this square, at the most uncomfortable hour, all he had to offer was a wad of bills in exchange for a lie. Emma noticed the hesitation in his gaze and looked down for a second, just enough to hide a shadow in her own eyes, because although he didn't know it, she too had her reasons for not selling herself easily. In her world, soft hands and expensive purses meant danger. She had learned to defend her dignity like a walled castle, because experience had taught her that whoever buys you once, never stops doing it. James's voice pulled her from her thoughts. 5 minutes, that's all. I won't ask you for anything else, he said, lowering his guard, almost pleading. Emma raised her gaze. That plea was like a crack in the perfect mask he wore, and for an instant, she saw something beyond the arrogant millionaire, a tired man, afraid of losing everything. She sighed deeply, and after a silence as long as the afternoon falling over the city, she nodded. But it will be my way, she warned, with a firm voice. You don't tell me how I should look at you, or what I should say. If you want me to pretend to be your girlfriend, I'll have to look real. James barely inclined his head, accepting the conditions even though they churned his insides. And as he followed her with his gaze toward the cafe exit, something stirred deep within him, a strange sensation he couldn't name. Emma returned for her purse, hanging in the back room, and when opening the curtain to enter, she stopped for a second to look at him over her shoulder. That brief glance pierced his chest, as if she had seen him beyond his disguise. Meanwhile, in a corner of the cafe, one of Emma's co-workers watched her with a furrowed brow. No one knew who that man was, who now followed her with his eyes, as if his life depended on it. But Emma knew he was another one of those who believed they could buy a piece of her time. Only this time, she planned to charge something more valuable. Outside, the night wind was already sweeping the square, and the streetlights began to turn on one by one. The city looked like a motionless postcard, but within those two hearts, everything was moving at a dizzying speed. As they walked together toward the restaurant where he had to face his meeting, the tension between them was almost visible, like a thread of fire that neither dared to cut. Emma didn't say a word, but her confident walk sent him a clear message. She wasn't going to let him dictate the pace. And James, who had dictated the rules all his life, had to contain a bitter smile. For the first time, someone was teaching him to play a different game, and although he wouldn't admit it yet, that sensation pleased him more than he was willing to accept. The restaurant was just a few steps away. Warm lights escaped through the windows, and an impeccable master received them with a practiced bow. James offered his name and a hand on Emma's back, who looked at him sideways before allowing the gesture. "Welcome, sir," murmured the master. "Your table is ready." She stepped forward a little, her dark hair waving over her shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, James felt he was following someone else. The evening was just beginning. The restaurant's dining room was a painting of golden light and discreet murmurs. The tables, dressed in white linen, shone under the chandeliers, and the aroma of expensive wine floated in the air like a reminder that only those who could afford it entered there. James guided her toward the back table, the one where his business partner and a couple of relatives were waiting, who, to his misfortune, always found a way to question his private life. Emma, with her firm steps and high gaze, seemed unfazed by the looks some diners were already giving her. No one recognized her, of course, because no one like her usually occupied a table like that. James slid the chair for her to sit, with a mechanical gesture, as if his body knew what it should do, even though his mind was distracted, trying to regain control. While he arranged his jacket on the back of the chair, Emma observed him sideways and noticed a slight tremor in his hands. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. When the first guest arrived, Emma was already sitting beside him, with her hands crossed in her lap and her chin high. The man, James's elderly uncle, looked at her with barely disguised surprise before forcing a hypocritical smile. "So someone finally managed to tame you, James," he commented with an empty laugh, while taking his seat. James responded with a grimace that pretended to be a smile, but Emma spoke up before he could open his mouth. "I think it's fairer to say we've reached an understanding," she said, her voice soft but firm, leaving an ambiguity in the air that drew an uncomfortable giggle from the uncle. He looked at her sideways, surprised by the initiative. and he couldn't help wondering, why did she sound so natural in that environment that didn't belong to her? One by one, the other guests arrived. His business partner with the scrutinizing gaze of someone who trusts no one, his cousin with a smile too sweet to be sincere, and they all settled at the table, throwing Emma small questions disguised as courtesy: her name, what she did for work, where they had met. She responded with the same calm with which she served coffee during her daily shift, avoiding easy lies but without revealing anything essential. Each word was measured, each smile placed in its spot, like an expert player on a chessboard. James, for his part, began to feel a strange mixture of relief and nervousness. Relief because she was saving him from ridicule in front of the others. Nervousness because every time he looked at her, he felt the situation slipping further from his hands. When the wine was served and toasts began, Emma decided to raise the stakes. She leaned slightly toward him, enough so only he could hear her, and murmured, "Now is when my part begins, isn't it?" James looked at her, confused. She smiled barely and raised her glass to toast with the others. "To us," she said, aloud with a naturalness that left everyone speechless. The room fell silent for a second before the others imitated her, clinking their glasses with hers. James raised his, almost without knowing what to say, and his business partner looked at him with a raised eyebrow. But then Emma looked into his eyes with unexpected intensity and said, still with her smile intact, "I hope that after tonight you fulfill your part of the deal." James swallowed, feeling the entire table spinning around him, because he didn't know which part of the deal she was referring to. And for the first time, he had no idea what his next move would be. Emma, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy every second of his discomfort. She leaned back slightly in her chair and let the others resume their conversations, while James's eyes remained fixed on her, trying to decipher what kind of woman he had by his side. Because it was clear she wasn't just another waitress. He could feel it. There was something more, something dark and brilliant at the same time, beating behind her serenity. Something that could completely disarm him if he wasn't careful. And then laughter was heard at the table, a biting comment from the business partner about how James had finally stopped being a confirmed bachelor, and he smiled out of obligation while Emma continued drinking from her glass, as if none of it touched her. But James could no longer look away from her. Somewhere inside him, something that had been sleeping for years was beginning to wake up, and he still didn't know whether he should fear it or surrender to it. The laughter at the table continued resonating like hollow echoes in James's head, while he wondered at what exact moment he had lost control of the situation. Because he had her in front of him, with that impeccable serenity, answering the incisive questions of his family and business partner, as if she owned the script of the entire evening. She wasn't just convincing, she was better than any real girlfriend he had ever had. He couldn't stop observing her. How she held the glass with innate elegance, how she returned compliments without seeming submissive, how she managed to make every biting comment from the uncle or cousin vanish into the air with just one look. But there was something that disturbed him even more, the way she looked at him when no one else was paying attention. That gaze of hers, deep, incisive, as if she was stripping away the invisible layers he had been building his entire life. He tried to regain ground. When the laughter died down for a moment, he slid a hand under the table and placed it over hers, feigning tenderness to reinforce the role they were playing. She looked at him for a second, and her fingers barely tensed, as if she were allowing him the gesture, but at the same time, reminding him that he wasn't the one directing this scene. James's heart gave a small jump. It was then that she leaned toward him, her hair brushing his cheek, and in a low voice whispered, "Are you comfortable in your role? Because I haven't even begun." The words ran down his spine like a shiver, and for the first time he felt afraid of what that woman was capable of making him feel. As the evening continued, James decided to get up for a moment and pretend he was taking a call, just to be able to breathe. He left the dining room, leaning against the hallway wall, releasing air as if he had just escaped from a fight he knew he was losing. But he didn't have time to compose himself, because just seconds later, Emma appeared behind him, walking with that calm of hers that drove him crazy. "I don't like pretending," she said without more, "but I also don't like people thinking they can buy me, and you almost did." He raised his gaze with a hint of wounded pride. "I didn't come here to fight with you, I just needed help." She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall in front of him. Maybe you should learn to ask for it without bills in hand, he smiled bitterly. I don't know how to do it any other way. Emma looked at him for a long time in silence, and for an instant, James felt that she really understood him. A waiter passed through the hallway and looked at them with curiosity, as if their little scene were more interesting than the dinner itself. Emma noticed and took a step back, composing herself, before returning to the dining room. James followed her with his gaze, feeling that each step of hers sank him deeper into territory that no longer belonged to him. And there, leaning against the restaurant wall, he couldn't help asking himself, since when did he need someone so much? And you, if you were in his place, would you accept someone like Emma's conditions, or would you walk away? Leave me your answer in the comments. I want to read you. Because what was clear to James, as he returned to the table, was that this woman was disarming his world piece by piece. And the most disturbing thing of all, is that part of him wanted her to do it. When he sat down again, Emma was already chatting with the cousin, laughing softly, as if nothing had happened. But her eyes, when they met his, reminded him that nothing about all of this was coincidental. And while the waiters cleared the first courses and served the next wine, James thought, with his heart beating faster than it should, that this night still had much to teach him. What he didn't know was how far he was willing to go to discover it. The second course arrived accompanied by a lighter conversation, and Emma adapted to that change in tone like someone changing clothes. Now, instead of the challenging woman from the hallway, she showed herself warm, even amusing, responding to the cousin's comments with small improvised anecdotes that managed to draw genuine smiles from everyone at the table. James watched her with growing amazement. In his life he had known actresses, models, women with impeccable smiles and perfect skin, but none never had achieved this, taming the tension of an entire room and turning it into a game without ceasing to be herself. His uncle, who until then had remained distant, began to participate, raising his glass toward Emma. "I take my hat off to you, dear," he said, with a grave voice and satisfied smile. I had never seen James so tamed. Laughter filled the table, but James couldn't help but stay quiet, listening to that word, tamed. And the worst of all, is that it didn't sound bad. Emma turned toward him, with a complicit smile, and briefly caressed the back of his hand on the table, a gesture as subtle as it was intimate. That caress was a bolt of electricity running up his arm. Suddenly he found himself wondering if that caress was part of the act, or not. When they served dessert, his business partner leaned toward Emma with an uncomfortable question, as if testing the veracity of their relationship. "And tell me, what do you like most about James?" The room fell silent, waiting for her answer. Emma left the spoon on the edge of the plate, looked into his eyes, and for a second time stopped. "That he never stops trying," she said softly, as if she had thought those words long before that night. "Even when he doesn't know how." James felt something inside him break silently, because in all his life, no one had said something so true about him. The looks at the table softened, as if that simple phrase had convinced everyone of the authenticity of their relationship. Even his cousin, who had seemed skeptical before, smiled at Emma with sincere tenderness. James swallowed, feeling how that woman, with each word, each gesture, was stripping away one by one the masks he had so carefully constructed. And the worst, or the best, is that he didn't want to stop her. The evening continued with a more relaxed atmosphere. The uncle proposed another toast, this time to new opportunities and life's surprises. Emma joined the gesture without hesitation, clinking her glass with the others, while James couldn't take his eyes off her profile illuminated by the soft light of the chandeliers. That night, more than once, he wondered what was hidden behind that calm. What scars that woman kept, what stories had taught her to hold her head high and make it clear that she wasn't anyone's property. The dinner came to an end, and the guests began to get up one by one. Between handshakes and formal farewells, everyone dedicated words of approval to Emma, which she accepted with impeccable courtesy. When they were alone at the table, James leaned toward her and whispered, "I didn't know you knew how to play like this." She looked at him with her dark eyes, and returned a soft smile, almost sad. "It's not a game for me," she said, and picked up her purse before standing up. He followed her to the exit, in silence, feeling that each step brought him closer to an unknown abyss, and wanting to jump anyway. Outside the restaurant, the night breeze hit their faces. The square was almost empty, illuminated by streetlights that drew long shadows on the cobblestones. James caught up with her and walked beside her without daring to say anything yet, because in his chest stirred a certainty he didn't dare to name. And in silence, he promised himself he would do whatever it took to understand what was behind those eyes. The square, now almost empty, seemed like a stage built only for them. The night was cool, and the distant sound of a street violinist floated in the air, covering the uncomfortable silence that had settled between the two. Emma walked a little ahead, her firm steps resonating on the cobblestones, while James followed her with his hands buried in his pockets. He could have tried to break the silence with some trivial comment, but something in the way she kept her gaze fixed ahead made him understand it wasn't time for empty words. After a couple of blocks, Emma stopped in front of a small fountain, its still waters reflecting the streetlight lights. She placed her hands on the stone edge and lowered her gaze, as if the water's ripples could give her some answer. James stayed a few steps away, observing her, feeling how the evening's tension was slowly transforming into a more intimate, more dangerous curiosity. Finally, it was she who spoke, with a low but clear voice. "Do you know why I didn't accept your money?" He swallowed, slowly approaching, until he was beside her. "Because you have principles," he ventured, like someone throwing a coin into a well hoping the answer would return. Emma let out a small laugh, bitter and soft. "Principles don't fill the refrigerator, but there are things that if you lose them, you never get them back." She paused, breathing deeply. "Like respect for yourself." He looked at her in silence, feeling the weight of her words, because deep down he knew he had paid too many times to obtain respect, and always ended up feeling empty. Emma turned toward him, and for the first time since he met her, her eyes filled with something like pain. "I also knew what it was to sell myself. Years ago," her voice barely broke, before composing itself, "and I swore never again." James wanted to ask her what exactly that meant, but something in her gaze stopped him. That was a story that wasn't told easily. She looked at the fountain again, and allowed herself a long sigh, like someone releasing a memory before drowning in it. And then by instinct, he extended his hand to her. "I'm not going to ask you anything you don't want to tell me," he said in a low voice. "But if you ever want to, I'll be here." She looked at him for an instant, as if measuring the sincerity in his words, and then with an almost imperceptible gesture, she placed her hand over his, leaving it there for a few seconds. The street violinist continued playing in the distance, and for the first time that night, James felt he wasn't in a hurry to return to his world. Because there, in the middle of that solitary square, he had found something that all his money had never been able to buy, someone who truly looked at him. She slowly withdrew her hand and stepped away a little, as if reminding him that closeness didn't mean surrender. But in her eyes there was no longer only hardness, there was a crack through which something more human, more fragile, peeked out. They walked together to the edge of the square, in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The breeze ruffled their hair and the air smelled of jacarandas, sweet and fresh. James wondered how many times he had passed through that same place without noticing anything that now seemed so evident to him, and he smiled to himself, with some sadness. Maybe he had never known how to look. Emma noticed sideways, and although she said nothing, her lips drew a small curve, almost imperceptible, that seemed to him an unexpected prize. When they reached the corner, she stopped. "I think this is where I should go," she said, in a tone that seemed more like a question than a statement. James looked at her, feeling an inexplicable emptiness at the idea of letting her go, but he didn't say anything yet, because in his chest a new thought was already beginning to take shape. He wasn't ready for that night to end like this. Emma stopped at the corner, with the breeze stirring the loose strands of her hair, and for the first time that night she avoided looking at him directly. James, standing barely a step behind, watched her as if in her silence there was an answer he didn't know how to formulate. The city lights twinkled in the distance, the street lights cast long shadows on the pavement, and for a few seconds the entire world was reduced to the space of a couple of meters between them. She barely turned her face and, with a low voice, said, "Thank you for not insisting." He took one more step, shortening the distance, and responded with rare honesty in him, "Thank you for not letting me fall into the lie." She closed her eyes, letting out a brief laugh, incredulous. "Don't give yourself so much credit. I just did what anyone with a little dignity would have done." But in her voice there was something more, a vulnerable nuance, as if those words were her last defense against something that was already crumbling. James stretched out his hand slowly and placed it on her shoulder. He felt her tremble, barely perceptible, and it was then that he understood that this woman, so strong, so serene, was not invulnerable. Not anyone, he corrected. Not anyone would have been able to look me in the eyes tonight. Emma breathed deeply and finally raised her gaze. Her eyes, dark and moist under the streetlight, pierced him with an intensity that left him breathless. "Don't be confused, James," she whispered. "I'm not here to save you." He smiled, sad and surrendered at the same time. "I know, but I still feel like you're doing it." She looked down, and at that moment, his hand slid slowly from her shoulder to her cheek, catching a strand of hair between his fingers. The gesture was so intimate that Emma blinked, surprised she didn't pull away, and in an impulse that neither knew where it came from, they leaned toward each other, their breaths mixing in the brief space that separated them. Time seemed to stop, the distant sound of traffic disappeared, the breeze became softer, and only the urgent sensation remained that this moment was theirs and no one else's. Their lips barely brushed hers, an ephemeral caress, almost non-existent, but enough to make both breathe deeply, as if they had been holding their breath all night. But it was Emma who stepped back first, pulling away with a slight movement of her head, denying with her eyes what her heart had felt. "No," she murmured, with a thread of voice that barely managed to break the silence. "Not yet." James looked at her, confused, hurt and grateful at the same time. Because even in her refusal, there was a hidden promise. Emma breathed deeply and took a step back, averting her gaze from his. The night breeze made itself known again, disheveling her hair and returning some color to her cheeks. "Good night, James," she said, before turning and starting to walk in the opposite direction. He followed her with his gaze, his hands hanging at his sides, empty, while his heart beat with an unbearable mixture of desire and pain. Each step she took seemed like a sentence, and yet, a part of him knew the story didn't end there. Because while Emma's figure disappeared among the avenue's shadows, James understood something with a clarity that hurt him. He was no longer master of himself. She had taken something of his that night, something he didn't even know he had to give. And while her last silhouette disappeared around the corner, James remained still, breathing deeply, remembering the warmth of her lips at barely a whisper's distance. For the first time in years, he felt fear, but also for the first time, hope. And under the dawn's cold, only his low voice remained, almost inaudible, directed at nothing. Not yet, but someday. The night remained suspended in James's memory, like a poorly developed photograph, blurry at the edges, but with a luminous center impossible to ignore. He didn't sleep. After seeing her disappear among the shadows, he walked aimlessly for hours, unable to return to his empty apartment. The city lights seemed colder at dawn, and each closed storefront, each solitary corner, reminded him of the brief but burning warmth of their almost kiss. He stopped in front of a storefront, where a mannequin wore a simple dress, almost identical to the one Emma had worn the night before. He stood there, motionless, wondering when he had stopped seeing people as something more than pieces of a negotiation. Because she had been different, she had been real. Emma's words echoed in his head like a bell. "I'm not here to save you, not yet." And for the first time in years, James felt his mask beginning to crack. He walked to his building, went up in silence, and upon entering his luxurious apartment, the walls returned an empty echo. He collapsed on the sofa and buried his face in his hands. His world, so perfectly constructed, seemed more fragile than ever. Somewhere in the city, Emma was also awake. She had sat on the windowsill of her small window, watching how the dawn painted the rooftops gray. The icy breeze filtered through the crack, but she didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just remembered. She remembered James's hands on her face, his warm breath, his broken gaze. She remembered the sensation of her own vulnerability when their lips almost met. She remembered the promise she had sworn to herself years ago, never to yield to anyone again. And yet, something inside her had crumbled on that corner. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass and closed her eyes, letting escape an inaudible whisper. "I shouldn't have stayed so long." But a part of her knew there was no turning back. The next morning, the sun timidly appeared over the city. James got up early, put on an impeccable suit, and went down determined to the lobby. While his driver waited, He dialed a number on his phone. No answer. He tried again, and nothing. Finally he wrote a message. "I need to see you, just to talk. This time, my way." He sent it and put the phone in his pocket, not daring to wait for an immediate response. Emma read the message mid-morning, while tying her hair back to start her shift at the cafe. Her fingers trembled as she held the phone, and her heart gave a strange jump. She didn't respond. That afternoon, while cleaning one of the tables by the window, she saw him crossing the square. He was alone, without a driver or secretary, with his jacket hanging from his arm, and a different look. He wasn't the same man from the night before. He no longer walked like someone who comes to buy. He walked like someone who comes to ask for forgiveness. When he reached the cafe door, she waited for him, with her back straight and her gaze serene. But inside her pulse was a frenzied drum. He opened the door and stopped in front of her. "Emma," he said, his voice lower, more human. "I don't want you to pretend anymore. I don't want this to be a deal." She looked at him for a long time, without moving. The entire square seemed to hold its breath, and for a second, the city's murmur disappeared. And although she didn't say it aloud, Emma felt how the walls around her heart loosened, one by one. Because behind James's eyes, there was no longer arrogance, only a man, naked of his pride, willing to lose everything to not lose her. For an instant, both remained motionless. The breeze entering through the cafe door made Emma's skirt tremble and disheveled James, but neither noticed. He looked at her fixedly, like someone on the edge of a precipice who still takes the step. And she, although her lips remained sealed, felt that her heart could no longer maintain the walls she had raised. Without asking permission, James approached a little more, his shadow covering hers on the floor. "I don't want to buy you," he murmured, so low that only she could hear him. "I want to deserve you." The words pierced her with unknown sweetness, and suddenly she felt small in front of the brutal sincerity that shone in his eyes. Because there was something different that morning. He was no longer the man who pretended to pay for a performance. He was someone who was learning, for the first time, to offer instead of demand. She observed him for a long time, trying to read between the lines, looking for some trace of deception. But she found nothing. Only a man, tired, broken at the edges, looking at her as if he truly believed she was the only thing worth saving. "First deserve to forgive your own sins," Emma said softly. "And then, maybe." James let out a small laugh, dry, almost nostalgic. "If it's with you, I can try." Emma looked at him one more second, and finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she invited him to sit with a hand gesture. He obeyed, like a child who finally receives a place at the table. The cafe was almost empty. The midday lights fell obliquely over the tables, drawing golden reflections in the steaming cups. James listened to her tell him, finally, a little of her story, how she had learned that not everything that shines can be touched without burning, how she had survived men who promised and didn't deliver, how she had chosen to be strong, and he, in a confession he didn't think he would be capable of making, told her about his father and the invisible chains that had forced him to always be more, always better, until he forgot to be himself. Emma listened in silence, and when he finished, without warning, she took his hand on the table and held it, warm and firm, like an anchor. James felt the tension in his chest loosen, and his eyes shone with a moisture he couldn't hide. She squeezed his hand a little more, as if saying without words, "You're not alone." He returned her gaze, and at that moment, he understood that it didn't matter how long he had pretended to be complete. She had already seen him broken, and still didn't let him go. The city continued beating outside, indifferent to the silent revolution occurring in that cafe. And when Emma gently withdrew her hand to get up and continue serving tables, James didn't stop her. Because now he understood he didn't need to have her tied down for her to stay. She looked at him once more before disappearing behind the back room curtain, and on her lips a small smile formed, one that he would keep in his chest like a treasure. And while she disappeared behind the back room curtain, James sighed, resting his forehead on his hand. Because finally, he understood what it meant to desire someone without wanting to possess her. And if you also felt something seeing James crumble and rise again, give me a like right now. Support this story with your heart if someone ever taught you to love without chains. The cafe doors closed behind Emma, and for the first time in his life, James felt light. Maybe love began like this, with the certainty that the person you want most owes you nothing, and with the silent promise that you'll do the impossible to deserve her tomorrow. The following days were different. James returned to the cafe every afternoon, at the same time, as if the clock hands turned only to take him there. Sometimes he ordered black coffee, sometimes not even that. He sat in the corner, with his jacket hanging on the chair, and his eyes fixed on Emma's figure moving between the tables. She didn't run to greet him, she didn't smile immediately either, but every time their gazes met, he felt that same sweet pang in his chest, and it was enough to stay. And little by little, like things that really matter, something began to bloom. One rainy afternoon, Emma sat across from him during her break. Her hair fell disheveled over her shoulders, and her hands still smelled of soap. He looked at her with a tenderness she pretended not to notice. "There's no deal anymore, is there?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Emma shook her head, with a small smile. "No, now there's no deal." The words pierced him like a caress. For the first time, he was there without masks, without transactions, without arrogance. Just him, just her. The sound of rain against the windows filled the silence while both remained quiet, as if they needed nothing more than each other's presence. When leaving the cafe that night, James walked beside Emma, under the same umbrella, and when they reached the corner where everything had begun, they stopped. The rain formed puddles on the cobblestones, and the lights reflected in their eyes, as if the entire city celebrated with them. He looked at her for a long time, and this time there was no almost. This time, he kissed her for real, a slow kiss, unhurried, charged with everything they hadn't said to each other. A kiss that asked for nothing in return, because it had already given everything. Emma responded with the same delicacy, placing a hand on his cheek, and at that moment, James knew he would never be the same again, because she hadn't just changed his night, she had changed his life. When they separated, both smiled like children, with that sweet shyness that's only felt when something true begins to germinate. James took her hand and intertwined his fingers with hers, and while they walked together under the rain, he looked at the sky and for the first time felt worthy of the opportunity life was giving him. Maybe love isn't a contract. Maybe love is deciding to stay, even when no one asks you to. If this story touched your heart, if you ever felt that someone taught you to love with freedom, subscribe to the channel right now, comment what moved you most, and share this story so more people believe, like you and I, that it's always possible to deserve a second chance. Thank you for staying until the end. Remember, it's not about finding someone who buys you, but someone who chooses you, every day, without conditions.